Hi there, folks. Saber4 here. We are going to do a couple things this week. This is the first of several videos that I have planned. Uh, this one, as we are headed towards a couple of sectors and the big battle in Atlanta this weekend, wanted to take a look at combating meta decks and talk a little bit about what we've got there. So we'll talk about some common plays that are in meta decks and some counters to them. First off, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Helps out the reach a lot, and it will kind of provide some feedback for things as we go. It'll let you know when we do things and kind of where we're going from here. Anyway, with this video, we'll talk about what is a meta deck, what we expect the meta decks to be, some common tricks and counters by deck, and you can see the list of them right there. And then what are some of the bigger actions from the non-meta decks and their tricks to look out for. When we talk about meta decks, if you're familiar with Star Wars or any other card game, you probably don't need this description or explanation. But if you're new to this and you're trying to understand what we mean and what you're hearing when you say meta decks, it is a specific combination of leader and color scheme with a similar build that occupy a large percentage of the overall tournament entries. And so these are the decks that if you sit down at a 8-person store event, you might not know who's going to play what. If you sit down at an 80-person event, you're going to be able to guess that large percentages of that event are going to play decks that are these or very similar to them. And so the things that make a deck a meta deck and the things that are reasons why these exist are that meta decks have endurance. They are able to play into a wide field and withstand the challenges of a very broad spectrum of other things. They've got power. Meta decks have strong and clear strategies. They have a way that they're intending to win games. They're very good at doing them, and they're very consistent. And so consistency is that last key. While any deck can perform well that is built well, meta decks are typically not dependent on a specific combination in order to execute their overall strategy. They're plastic, they're variable, they're able to change, and they're able to adapt and play into that wide field better than that wide field is able to play into them. When you're playtesting to go to places or to just, be a part of a store tournament where you have players who might play meta decks, these are the things that you'll want to have answers for, because otherwise when you sit down against them, these are the ones that will just kind of run you over. What we'll cover for each of these decks: the general playstyle, what we expect from the leader, including the most common base pairing, the biggest threat that each of these decks might have, and what it does that uniquely presents the biggest challenge. And then if they have them, the kill on sight cards. They might not be the biggest threat in the game, but if they stay on the table, that game's not going to go well for you. So let's go ahead and dive on in. What do we expect the meta to be? I've kind of sized these. This is not a percentage of 100%. This is just kind of what I expect them to land in the overall. This is the biggest. This is the next. This is kind of down from it. I expect the meta to be heavy with Jango Fett, Admiral Piett, Han Solo, Sabine Wren, and Quinlan Voss. And before we move on, just so that you can see what each of them do, let's talk about these just very briefly. Jango Fett, he is a nice big body on 5. 3/7 is a nice stat line for 5 cost leader, as you can see there with Quinlan Voss as well. And when a friendly unit deals damage to an enemy unit, you can exhaust that unit. On his leader side, this is a once per turn action. On his unit side, this is a static action. Piett, they're also on 5. You play a capital ship, cost 1 less. If you do that with him on his unit side, it's a static discount of 2. Sabine will deal damage to a base just as an action. And on her unit side, which she deploys at 4, you can ping a base with each attack that she gets to make. Han Solo is resource cheating. He's a 6 deploy and is the largest leader that's out there. 4/6, so not the biggest health pool, but the biggest attack. And he puts down a ready resource from your deck every time you attack with him. And then Quinlan Voss allows you to ping, allows you to deal damage to a unit. On his leader side here, that 1 damage can be to anything that is same cost or less as a card that you just played. And on his leader side, that is the same cost as any unit that's in play. Let's dive in, starting with what I expect to be the most popular deck in this early meta, and that is Jango Fett. Jango is going to be paired almost exclusively with Tarkin Town. He is very strong into a wide field. He's kind of weak to control overall. Han has always given him some fits, as have other controlling decks. And then shielded units give Jango problems, and that's going to be the same with Quinlan Voss, because pinging that shield and getting rid of that shielded unit is just a little bit more difficult for them to do. It doesn't have as clean of a play. This Jango is often space heavy. He came out of a shell that was a Boba Fett red shell early on, and was more space heavy than really anything else at the time. And he has remained very space heavy. Now has shifted a little bit into other vehicles as well. He's often going to use triple dark raid. He's going to use sneak attack. He's going to discount those vehicles with an event that brings them in ready. So he's able to use their unique ability and swing the unit on the same turn. That leads us to our biggest threat, which is easily the biggest threat of any that we're going to see in here, just because it represents the most burst damage at once, and that is triple dark raid into Devastator. If you look through the channel, again, I'm only going to plug this one more time, please subscribe to the channel. The Boba Fett, or no, the Jango version that I've got right now plays Bib Fortuna, and that means that I can pull triple dark raid into Devastator on my Jango flip turn. And so that means that, if you don't have a clean answer to a Devastator on 5, well, I get to put 13 damage into the base. And that can end games very quickly. That's more than half of a Tarkin Town base. And if you've put any other damage on it, you've just jumped into your end game immediately. The most common plays that you're going to see, though, are triple dark raid into a Ruthless Raider or into IG-2000 or War Juggernaut, with IG-2000 and War Juggernaut being the more preferred play as we start talking about Jango being deployed. Counters for this: anything that is 6 cost or less and is not piloted, the cleanest counter that we have in the game right now for any of those vehicles is Commandeer. If you're running yellow, you've got to be running this card. It allows you to take that unit, ready it, use it for yourself, and then bounce it back to their hand. And so if you defeat it, if you defeat one of their units with it, bash their own unit into their own unit, it's a great clean answer. War Juggernaut comes out, it exhausts half your board, it damages everything on the board, but now you get to swing with it for 8 instead of them swinging with it for 8, and it goes back to their hand. Yeah, it ran over Jango. Now he can only exhaust one thing next turn. So there's a lot of ways that you can use Commandeer to your advantage that is just superior to any of the other answers that are here. However, Jango has often used quite a lot of resources to do this. Waylay is a nice clean answer, even though some of these units might ping you again the next round. It doesn't allow them to swing this turn, and they won't necessarily be able to replay something like their Devastator if they brought it in too early with triple dark raid. No Good to Me Dead is wonderful if you're playing with villainy. It'll exhaust that unit. It is an especially powerful counter to something with sneak attack. Bamboozle, which you can play for 0 and doubles as defeating pilot leaders. Bamboozle is a great card to be running in anything yellow. Cat and Mouse, if you're playing villainy, allows you to exhaust one of your units and ready one of yours. Electromagnetic Pulse will damage that unit and exhaust it for 1. It's another great one. Perilous Position out of blue is a good counter. It's going to stack. It's going to take away some of the power of some of those units, and it is going to exhaust them. And then Lux Benteri is another thought to include here. He's 2 cost that you can put out there on the ground, and if they are going to play anything that is discounted, you can ready or an exhaust and just kind of make their life a little bit more difficult. Bounce effects of really any kind are useful against a lot of this Jango strategy, as well as turning off events. So if you are playing Piett and you can get a Relentless on the table, you've turned off a lot of what Jango is trying to do, and you're forcing them to play fair and to hard cast their War Juggernaut, or to hard play their IG-2000. Yeah, it might stop you for a turn, but it's not nearly as powerful of a play without something like Triple Dark Raid or Sneak Attack to bring it in ready. Jango, as we said, struggles into control. He struggles into shielded units. He has the ability to swing big with that Devastator and recover and get stuff done, but keep in mind that both Triple Dark Raid and Sneak Attack remove that unit from the board. And so one of the things that Jango struggles with is if you can press early damage and keep units out on the table, he can struggle just because he doesn't maintain board presence quite the same way as strategies that keep their units on the board. The kill on sight here is the Jango Fett leader unit. Just because he has the ability to pump out there, drop out, as we said, IG-2000 War Juggernaut, exhaust your whole board, and just make your life miserable if the Jango unit is allowed to stay on the field. Admiral Piett. Admiral Piett, which we will do a video about a little later this week, is extremely linear. His early game is to ramp, and he's going to do that on turn 2 and possibly again on turn 3 with resupply carrier, super laser technician, and try to get out there and get out ahead on resources. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But he's trying to get up there in resources quickly and then beat you to death with big ships. Multiple variations, and this week when we release his video, we're going to see 3 of them. On the channel, I already have a couple of the preliminaries from back in the earlier days of the previews, and so if you were looking through those, I've got a couple of Piett decks that are down there that you can kind of take a look at. Piett is very soft on the ground. He is usually a one card per turn deck, especially when you start talking about his end game, but he can get to his end game very quickly. This is a command deck that is extremely aggressive from turn 3 on. Turn 1 and 2, he's probably not going to do very much. Turn 3 on, he can really turn the screws. You got to keep in mind that things, the ship that comes out that's your Relentless is it's a 3-turn game ender. They need 1 swing from Piett, 3 swings from it, and the game's over. And so those capital ships are a huge threat. But you're not going to see a lot that combats your ground units. The biggest threat are the early capital ships, especially the Spark of Rebellion Devastator. Keep in mind it does only do damage based on the resources that are there. But with Piett out, you can do that with 8 resources, and that is a very, very easy task to get to with Piett. And suddenly you've got a 10-10 overwhelm roadblock out in space. It's common, as we said, to see multiple uses of ramp. And then to see ramp past turn 2, where we see the resupply carrier or the Arquittan's cruiser. Turn 1, whatever play they make. Turn 2, they play resupply, they're 1 resource ahead. Turn 3, they play a resupply carrier and they're 2 resources ahead. And then turn 4, that means that they can play an Arquittan's cruiser. If you have a space unit that a 7/7 is going to defeat, well, that's a resource that they get now. And if you put another space unit out, I'm sure they'll be happy to eat it. Um, you know, it's a hard cycle to get in, but that leaves them it leaves them able to play a Devastator on turn 5, and that can be just a very hard thing to get around because most people are going up to their 6th resource. The best counters that you have for this are hand disruption. If you can snipe out key events or key units, or if you can make those more expensive, if Kira plays and makes turbo laser salvo more expensive, or bounce effects. He's playing 1 card per turn. You're not going to see a big play out of Piett where you see multiple Star Destroyers come out at once unless he gets so far ahead in resources that I don't know what he's doing not swinging at the base. Kill on sight here is the Spark of Rebellion Admiral Piett unit. The 2-cost 1/4 Spark of Rebellion Admiral Piett, because everything from resupply carrier up, we're talking about ships that he can turn on ambush for. And having that ability, especially as some of those ships bring in overwhelm, is incredibly powerful because it means that they can drop them, swing with them, and do a lot of damage to a base because, remember, these are capital ships. They're swinging with a baseline of 4 to 6. And once you start talking about those that are in the 8 cost and above range, it's 7+ every time. So their ability to drop out there, put on an ambush attack, and especially if they overwhelm with it, is incredibly powerful. The other thing you might want to watch out for if you're playing the red variant is jump to Lightspeed Tarkin, just because he allows all of those units to have access to overwhelm instead of just ambush. Card to watch out for, one of the cards you want to take out of their hand, especially if Piett is near flipping or if he has a space unit on the table, is the Turbo Laser Salvo. Unless you have shielded units and can withstand that somehow, that is by far the best of the area of effect events that's in the game. And if you can snipe that out of his hand, you're going to be a lot better off clearing that probably than if you're dealing with overwhelming barrage. Han Solo. I will admit I am not a big Han Solo player. I know how to play it. I have played it effectively. It's not my favorite deck to play, and so it's not one that I usually spend a lot of resource on. It is very versatile. Every version of Han that we've gotten so far as a leader does the same thing in a different way. They all resource cheat. But original Han probably did it best. Yellow and green variants are going to be your most common. And this is, again, something that's been very durable. This Han has been very good since set 1. And he just keeps plugging in good pieces along the way. He's got the ability to resource cheat. He's got the ability to bounce. He's got the ability to exhaust, to make your things more expensive. He's got the ability to steal resources. He is a hard thing to deal with for most decks. His biggest threat in yellow is a smuggled DJ. That's possible in green decks as well, though it's usually aided by tech. He probably doesn't want to do that on 9 resources. But he can do that on a 5 resource turn if he's in yellow, because he puts the tech down puts DJ down from his hand, deploys Han, attacks with Han, brings up a 7th resource, steals a resource from you, destroys it at the end of the turn. Your resource, you went down a resource and it never came back. The other big threat that you have in double yellow is the ability to play Cunning at cost. Cunning is still, for my use, the best of the double aspect cards. It has amazing effects on all 4 of its options. Where some of them, there's 3 options that I've used. Two of them most of the time, one of them sometimes, one of them never. But Cunning, it's hard to make a bad choice. In green, U-wing reinforcement is is a big threat because you can drop out several units at once. Ramp is a threat in that one just because, a Han that can already resource cheat and is now able to go ahead on resources is problematic. And then that also gives them access to the Chewbacca unit. And a scary, scary play that Han can make would be to turn 1 Falcon and then turn 2 Chewbacca in that Falcon. And that creates a 6-7 space unit that you can't remove. And so very, very difficult to deal with. And we'll talk a little bit more about Chewbacca on down the line. Kill on sight, any tech that's on the field before turn 7. Why tech more so than DJ here? Because tech enables DJ to go for a discounted smuggle. Tech makes it where your cost +2 and aspect, as opposed to it being the 7 and double that it would cost if DJ was smuggled in normally. And so tech can make that DJ smuggle turn on 5 resources rather than on the 5 resource turn. And so it's a real hard thing to stop when Han can do that early. The best counters are to kill on sight, or to have things in your deck that are able to deal 5 damage, to deal that breakpoint damage to Tech or DJ, to deal that damage to Kira, to deal 6 damage to Han, or to disrupt his flip turn in a way that you exhaust Han and don't allow him to play the attack and play the 7 cost thing that he intended to play. Disrupting Han's hand is very beneficial as well, because especially prior to his flip, Han has to lose a card in order to activate his ability. So anytime that you can disrupt his play, if he puts down a resource first, and then you can spark out the 3 cost thing that he was gonna play. Now he destroyed one of his cards in his hand to put it on the table, and so you can really kind of you can out tempo Han in a lot of interesting ways. Sabine has been good since set 1 as well as Han. In set 1, she was by far the deck that you had to beat. She's been my gatekeeper for quite some time. Now a little bit less so, and not because she's weaker, but because some other decks have just become better over time. The main combination you're going to see here, you're almost exclusively going to see Sabine ECL. You saw some variants of her where saw blonde Sabine, you've seen double red, you've seen rarely blue, but you've seen some of it glance here and there at times. But Sabine ECL remains by far her best color. The playstyle is purely aggressive. They're going to almost exclusively attack base over trading units, and then they're going to use the leader ability that Sabine has to shorten the game. Because every time that she is able to use her leader action, we're shortening the game by a damage for both sides, but we're shortening the game by a damage knowing that we race better than most other decks. She has the ability to lane dodge, and now, while she's usually weaker in space, especially from set 3 on, she's been a little weaker in space than some other things. It is one of those where her ability to play and fight in space has made her a threat to be able to lane dodge early on and then continue to make power plays on the ground. The biggest threats, I said we would talk about Chewbacca again. Chewbacca as a pilot. If you can't deal with that turn 1 A-Wing or that turn 1 Y-Wing or whatever space unit they put out there, and they throw Chewbacca on it early, they don't take their ping, they grab initiative, and they throw Chewbacca on that, you're going to lose some games on sight. Because now that's a swings for 6 unit that's out in space that removal doesn't work on. And you're a couple of turns away at least from being able to deal with 6 health. Wrecker ECL remains its biggest, hardest hitting play. And so that's one of their big threats, but it's not a threat that we can do very much about, with the exception of ripping Wrecker from their hand. And then a wide board, just, she's going to go face. She's going to attack your base. And a wide board is something that you're not going to be able to control with single target removal. And so it takes getting up to things like turbo laser salvo or things like overwhelming barrage in order to take out a wider board. Or Jango's exhaust and exhausting multiple things, but that happens after Sabine's flip, and her flip turn is usually very powerful. The best counter you have, shrink the board. Exhaust those units, get them off the table. Any 2-for-1 counter before Sabine can attack. And in 2-for-1 counter, meaning that I trade out one of my units in a way that it takes out a unit on play and then sticks around to be able to take out another one. Sabine can find that difficult to recover from. Any sort of sentinel units are problems for Sabine, because although she will have some saboteurs and she might lane dodge, she plays so many small units and so many small costs to go wide that a large sentinel can be just an absolute roadblock for her. You've got a huge one in the interdictor cruiser. If that gets on the table for Blue Piett, her space units are just shut down, because on defeat it also kills off another unit that costs 3. Well, that just means that you shut an entire lane off, and as long as you can do something to mitigate the damage on the ground or to slow it down, your big ships will outlast the things that she's able to do. Kill on sights for Sabine. Any turn 1 space unit, especially if you're seeing ECL, expect that Chewbacca's coming next. Kill on sight that turn 1 space unit. The Sabine unit, especially if they're sitting on 4 open resources, because very much like Chewbacca sitting in an A-wing, Sabine gets a Darksaber, she's swinging for 7. The game's going to be over before you have a chance to act. Sabine has become more of a true to curve deck since, as the sets have gone on. The first set version had a lot of cards that they were hoping to play, and they were going to play. Their big reach card at the time was For a Cause I Believe In, and now that's a little bit less the case. You might still see fleet lieutenants. You might still see a leader flip turn, and she drops a fleet lieutenant out and swings for a little bit bigger. But that's a little bit less of a play now than it was in the early part of the game. Poe available on turn 4 is a nice big play for Sabine, but she's probably going to try and hold Wrecker, especially if there's a ground presence for that turn 5 and ECL him in. That's still 12 damage to the board is still her biggest threat. Quinlan Voss. Quinlan is a force package. He's very likely to be paired with Tarkentown. Runs a similar toolbox of hand disruption to Han, except that he is much better at hand disruption. Han is a more diverse deck overall. Quinlan is much more focused, and when you focus on something like hand disruption, you can whittle your opponent down to the choice of these 2 cards that I drew top deck. One of them still needs to be a resource, and one of them is going to be the thing that I play if I get to play it. And staying on that until their leader flip, and then maybe drawing cards after that if they don't have to go bigger. And so this is the best deck that you have at hand disruption and keeping hand small. The oddity of this is that Quinlan Voss's units almost across the board attack with a damage in a multiple of 3. It is their 9th action in most cases, or unless they have something that splashes for an extra 1, it's 7 or 8 actions at least to finish off a 25 HP base. If you have a 30 HP base, 10 actions to get it done. And so Quinlan has to navigate a space where he is able to keep a board small and keep pressing damage into the base rather than putting damage into the units. And so Sentinels are a problem for him as well. He's able to one-shot a lot of leaders with Plo Koon, especially leaders that cost 5 or less, because Plo Koon costs 5, and if Quinlan is if you have one unit on the table and can flip Quinlan Voss, that threatens to kill on sight any leader that flips into him. And so, you have to sequence your turns wisely if they've got another unit on the table. Biggest threat is forcing you to the top deck, especially if your deck is dependent on combination plays or is dependent on you being able to make the choice between a couple of things in a turn. Low resource decks can get around this. Sabine, if she doesn't need to deploy past 4 or 5, it can get past this pretty quickly because she's under the same umbrella that he is and is still dropping out units, and her units will probably outrace what's there, as long as you get past the Tarkin Town. Force throw is another big one, but not something that you can necessarily do unless you can rip it from hand. They've got a lot of force units. They can wind up giving you. They can wind up ripping cards from your hand and dealing damage, or throwing their big unit at your unit to get it cleared. The counters, ping damage, and exhaust. This deck struggles into Jango. It does well into the wide field. It often struggles into Jango. Playing ahead of curve. If you ramp on Quinlan, he can no longer, especially if you're playing now on your new curve, he can no longer utilize his action to ping because you are playing above the cost of his units. And so if you resupply turn 2 and you're able to stabilize past that turn, the next thing that you played cost 5 or 6 in some cases. And instead of Quinlan now being able to ping and Tarkin Town or deal with that unit in a way that it's already got damage on it, what do I care? You couldn't ping and catch up. Kill on sights, Plo Koon. You're not going to be able to kill him generally the turn that he comes out because he's likely going to ambush into whatever's there, but you would like to be able to finish him off. And the reason for that is that with Coordinate activated, this is the biggest swing that he has. These decks might put Han on the table. They probably will run 3 Hans, but that's their 7 resource, and so that's still 2 turns down the line. And killing off Plo Koon eliminates the possibility that they're going to be able to come out, swing for 6, or surprise strike in for 9. And so this is the best way that you can slow down their board. Red 5 is another kill on sight with this, because Red 5, if it's allowed to sit out there in space and Quinlan is allowed to ping, Red 5 is just going to rip your units to shreds. If it's allowed to sit out there in space and not be destroyed, every time it attacks, its on attack ability is going to pop you for 2 damage. It's going to pop a damaged unit. And then you have things like Hotshot Maneuver that can come in and chain that. And so for that on attack, adding another 2 damage and then killing something off. So Red 5 can effectively, very quickly, end a 5 cost unit that's on the board, or a 5 health unit that's on the board, as long as Quinlan was able to ping it. Other big interactions to look for. And now some of these can be found in the meta decks. Some of them are a little bit harder to play in the meta decks just because they're not a great fit. But these are some big interactions that if you're playing some of these, this is kind of the biggest, least fair thing they can do. Anything that's playing Red Hero, especially if you're looking at something like Han 2, and I'm talking the second Han that came out, Young Han, bigs into a dilapidated speeder. Well, the dilapidated speeder, that can all happen on turn 2 with Han 2. he uses his ability, he discounts the speeder in, he does 2 damage to it, does 3 damage to itself. It's a 3/7 that took 5 damage. Okay, that seems reasonable. Well, let's put bigs on it. It's a speeder. It's a 5/8 grit unit with 5 damage on it. If that's allowed to stick on the board, it swings for 10. And if you're playing space heavy, or you've lane dodged and gotten out there in space, that can be an incredibly difficult thing to counter. Yeah, it's only got 3 health, but that's 3 swings, and it's a 30 health base. So it's really, really difficult to deal with if you're not on the ground to take it out right now. Red Yellow Hero, they hate that ship. Well, if you have a space unit on the board, this creates the 2 TIE Fighter tokens first, which doubles the discount, and now I can put home 1 out there as a 7/8 ambush on 4 resources. And so you can really drop a very early home 1 on somebody who has played a space unit of any kind. That also works if they have played Tarkin, which I talked about a little bit earlier on. Jump to Lightspeed Tarkin gives that ambush unit Overwhelm. I played it into a TIE Fighter token. Well, that was an Overwhelm for 6. And there's another TIE Fighter token out there that you better crash into home 1 just so that you don't have another Overwhelm. Any red hero combination space unit, red-green hero combo space unit on turn 1 threatens a turn 2 Chewbacca. We talked about that twice before. We're not going to cover it again. The mirror of this is Vader on a turn 1 ship, the 3-cost pilot for the new Vader, which a 7/7 ground unit for 6 is nothing to sneeze at. The only thing that Vader doesn't do that Chewbacca does is that Vader does not prevent you from bouncing that card or defeating it. But he does do pings, and so Vader can effectively do a lot of the same things that Chewbacca does with some damage added. But just know that that's kind of the mirror of Chewbacca. Chewbacca just does it a little bit better on those turn 1 units. And then the Boba burn deck, which we will also cover on this channel. The Boba burn deck, triple dark raid into the jump to Lightspeed, into the new Fett's Fire Spray. He can double dip the indirect damage and trigger Boba. Now, the thing that I didn't put on here, because I've been trying to figure out exactly how to play it, and I wanted to add in with that interaction, is that triple dark raid cost 3, gives you 5. Well, that's a 4-cost ship. It came out for free. It gets to attack, and we can double dip its indirect damage. So we do 2 and 2, and then Boba with another one, so 5. Do that on 5 resources. Instead of triple dark raid and putting it away, jump to Lightspeed. Take it to my hand, put it back out there again. It's done 7 indirect damage in a single turn. And so you can have some pretty nasty interactions with that thing. Yeah, okay, it cost my 5 resources this turn, but I don't really care, especially if I'm playing Boba Burn, because now I've got a ship that's going to be on the table looking into Boba's flip turn, that if I stick him on it, it's going to deal 2 indirect and possibly an 8/8. So another big one right there. Like I said, that is by no means an exhaustive list of some of the other stuff that's out there, but just some of the huge, like, what can hit me the hardest, quickest. The red hero, the red yellow hero, can do that as well with a Falcon. And I'm talking the 5-cost Falcon, and can do that on turn number 2. So it's another combination to watch for, because that one's only going to cost 5, and you don't have to have anything other than a space unit out there. So anyway, that's what we have for right now. These are some of the biggest actions to watch for, and how to combat some of the major meta decks that you're going to see. Good luck with your tournaments out there if you are headed to one of the big ones, and we will see you several times this week, I expect, with some of the other decks. I am geared up for a Luke deck that might play well into some of these meta matchups, though he probably isn't going to be big enough to call him a meta deck. I've got 3 versions of Piett queued up, and I've got a Boba burn deck that I'm hoping to get all out in video this week before we get to the end of the week. So, subscribe to the channel, and we will see you next time.